From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode number 443. I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. I'm joined as always by Derek. He is D3 in our forum, and D384 on Twitter. Derek, happy 2K Day.
Hey, we made it. We made it another year, Andrew.
We did, yes.
NBA 2K23 is out, and not only is it out, but Andrew and I both have a current gen and next gen version of the game, and we have spent time with both, so we're going to be able to give our first impressions on this show.
As I said last week, I avoided the folly of relying on Australia Post to deliver my pre-order on time. I said click and collect, and went to the shop and picked it up when it said my pre-order was there to collect. So yes, I actually get to play it on release day this year. What a concept.
Yeah, and such a great Jordan cover, right?
It is.
Like, it really looks cool. I think they, and no, I'm not being biased towards the old NBA or the fact that, I like Jordan better than Devin Booker or anything like that. But I'd like to say the Jordan, okay, so you are, right? But I'd like to say that the Jordan cover is a whole lot better than the Booker cover, in my opinion, just like the whole, the style of it, and I think it looks cool.
It does. As I said last week, I did consider the Championship Edition to get that League Pass subscription, but now that they're reducing the price of League Pass worldwide from the looks of things, I may just look at getting that separately. The Jordan Edition will do me just fine. It comes with the pre-order bonuses that we'll get into with a little bit of my career when or at least dive into my career to review it. I'm probably not going to be playing it exclusively this year. I'll probably stick to 2K14, my career for that fix. But I have actually put 2K14 on the shelf for the moment, Derek. I want to really dive into 2K23, and I have been playing the next-gen version a lot over the last couple of days.
Yeah, and so have I. So that works for this podcast as well, and we're going to be able to give, some detailed first impressions. The first time I put my hands on the sticks for the next-gen version of NBA 2K23, I was not pleased, and I actually messaged you a few times, and the main reason for that, and we'll get into this in a little bit, was that the first thing I did was throw classic teams on the floor, and they don't play very well out of the box for many of the same reasons they didn't in past years. But once I switched to current teams and got them on the floor, the action was pretty free flowing and overall fun, and it wasn't just like a slog fest. So I don't know what your first go-to was for, putting teams on the floor, if it was classic, if it was current, etc. But that's what I did, and that was a mistake.
96 Bulls versus 96 Sonics. That was my first game this year.
So yeah, there you go. I'd be curious to know how that felt for you on the sticks. What your first impression was, if maybe it was a little bit more positive than it was for me.
I mean, I had a lot of trepidation going into that because you had said that it was disappointing, so I was bracing myself for the worst. And yes, when I first got on the sticks, a lot of it felt very similar to 2K21 and 2K22. No huge surprise there. But at the same time, I've been playing a lot of 2K14, obviously, so I've not really had hands on the sticks for 2K22 for most of the last 12 months. I put that aside very early, as you know, and as I've told our listeners before. So there was a period of adjustment as I was playing 2K23 for the first time. And yes, I noticed a lot of the legacy issues with movement, with AI and things like that, and your usual press steal to foul, and some cheesy interceptions and whatnot. It just seems to be part of the gameplay design at this point, unfortunately, some of those issues. But the more I played it, I actually started to adjust to that movement, and how it feels different to 2K14, obviously. And I actually ended up having a pretty good time with that first game of 2K23. And I've been playing a bit of MyTEAM, mostly the 3v3, the triple threat offline. And it's been fun. I do have my quibbles. When it's annoying, it's really annoying. Whether it's issues with player movement or cheesy moments by the CPU on higher difficulty levels. But no, my first impressions were far more positive than the last couple of years, and that was really nice.
Yeah, I think for me, it was my second impressions were far more positive, and I let you know that as well in our chat. And my pros list is actually quite a bit longer than my cons list.
That's good. That's good.
NBA 2K23 next gen right now, yeah. And I also spent some time with the PC version, and to give you an idea of, how we felt about it, my brother and I, when we were playing, he was like, I might want to mod this game. And that's because overall the foot planning is better on PC than it is on next gen, and that's a big thing for both of us. And the dribbling feels really tight. The shooting feels functional and fun and whatnot. Playing defense feels quite a bit better because the foot planning is better. So you're not just sliding around, when you're trying to stay in front of your man and whatnot, and you feel like you can, get back on help defense, etc. So I think that I'm kind of excited about the PC version this year. And my brother and I either will get into a modding project, or I might do modding myself, or, we might start a season on it or something like that. So that was really cool. Like, that's the first time in a few years where we picked up the PC version for the first time and enjoyed it. Our first game, we enjoyed it. No slider tweaks, nothing.
That's a really good sign as well, to state the obvious. I haven't played as much of the PC version as yet. My Steam key came in a little bit late, and I was just so hooked on the getting into the next-gen version and forming some impressions on that I haven't spent as much time with the PC version. Actually jumped into it just before we started recording and shot around a little bit in 2KU, so I haven't played in a competitive scene as yet, but I did like the player movement. Arguably feels a bit better than next-gen.
It does, yeah. That's what my brother and I were saying, and I said that to a few people on Twitter as well, people in the basketball gaming community, who are on PC, and they were wondering what my thoughts were on it and whatnot. And I said, to be completely honest with you, out of the box, this is the best that PC has felt in a long time.
Agreed.
And I think that's a really good sign. I think that NBA 2K, like what we were saying on the podcast, the developers, Visual Concepts, the 2K developers, etc. I was trying to tell people I didn't think that they forgot about the PC crowd, right? Like, they weren't trying to shun the PC crowd or trying to push them out or anything like that. They did a lot of upgrades to the presentation, everything from the main menu to the edit player screens to parts of the gameplay, making the dribbling as close to next gen as possible, adding the dunk meter. As much as we don't like it, they added it in this year for the PC version and the current gen version in general, etc. So now that also is like next gen. They brought over the Jordan Challenge, all of that stuff. So they definitely, and they obviously tried to make MyTEAM in sync with what it is on next gen. So that's the furthest thing from just like disregarding the PC version. So I was happy to get my hands on the sticks and also feel like they kind of tightened up the gameplay. Like, that made me feel good as a consumer, to be honest with you, and it made me a little bit more excited for 2K's direction moving forward.
No, I can definitely see that. And it is great that last gen got that attention, because we've been speculating for at least a couple of years now, since the launch of the current generation, or next gen, the nomenclature really gets muddied at times, but they have put that attention on last gen, with PC and PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, and we've speculated on previous shows for, again, a couple of years now, whether they're going to be phasing out, and when they're going to be phasing out the previous generation. And I mean, that still might happen in the next couple of years, but they've not neglected it this year, and that's been very refreshing, as you said. And I was very pleased to see that. And yeah, I might even look at getting into some modding myself this year. I mean, I could get enthusiastic about the PC version of 2K23 compared to 2K22 and 2K21, which really felt like afterthoughts on that generation.
Right. I also think it'd be cool for you and I to play some online games on the PC version. Maybe share that content with the community, see how that experience is and whatnot. Because you never know, we may have some fun. And,
Absolutely.
We could try it over Parsec if it works better over Parsec, or we could use the in-game server connection and try that. But I've been pleasantly surprised. And when I get into my pros for NBA 2K23, you'll see that I have a lot of good things to say about it. And it's very nice to be able to come on to this podcast. We've been doing this for a few years together now. Very nice to be able to come on to the podcast with some enthusiasm and some excitement for the current release.
Oh, for sure. And we do have our criticisms, as we alluded to. We do have things that we're not so happy with and things that can definitely be improved. But we're not going to sit here, we're not going to bash, we're going to constructively criticize. And also, these are our first impressions. We're going to be talking about 2K23 a fair bit over the next 12 months or so, I would say. So our impressions will evolve, I'm sure, and of course patches. You never know what changes that patches and those tuning updates that come through are going to make. So we do reserve the right to amend our opinions as time goes on. I do want to do a proper review this year. I said that last year. I just didn't do it because I just didn't feel so enthusiastic about it. That's kind of my review of 2K22, I guess. Not enthusiastic, but I do want to do an in-depth review in addition to the podcast this year. But you're right. It does feel great to be coming on here and not feeling so disappointed with the latest release and feeling, yes, we could actually play this for 12 months, going up until the next release. And look, I've been playing a lot of 2K14, obviously, but I was ready to put that aside, Derek. And I won't. I don't want to touch on that too much because this show is all about our first impressions of NBA 2K23, not 2K14. But I did finish my 4th season. I'm into my 5th. That's over 400 games, basically, that I've played in the last 12 months or so, which is crazy when you think about it. Still having a blast with it, but at the same time, I was ready to move on. And I think that also helped me with 2K23. Last year, I was in the middle of that 2K14 kick and really taking off with that 2K14 kick, and that didn't help when I didn't have that great first experience with 2K22. Now that I've been ready to put that aside, diving into 2K23 and feeling positive about it, that feels so much better.
Yeah, the retro and classic gaming doesn't stop. But every now and then it is nice to sink your teeth into something new.
Absolutely.
Right? It's nice to, get on the sticks and play a completely new experience with new content and whatnot. And, have something new to look forward to. So I'm definitely not stopping my retro gaming and collecting and, posting that footage and all of that. I mean, I just recently posted footage of March Madness 98 on my Twitter handle, etc. But I'm very happy the fact that not only am I into the NBA 2K23 for both gens for various reasons, but so is my brother. As you know, my brother lives with me. A lot of my gaming sessions, highlights, etc., are me and him playing, whether it be co-op or against each other and whatnot. And him being into it as well as I am makes it a lot more enjoyable to get on the sticks. So I'm pretty excited for that. But I do have cons. I do have things that bug me about, and constructive critiques about NBA 2K23, and I will get into those. And I think that they're important for the developers to hear, other gamers to hear as well. And it's not a bash session. It's never been a bash session on this podcast. But we do have the right to critique the games as well and talk about things we want to see improved.
And as we get into those pros and cons, I do want to touch on it briefly, that the first 2 weeks after a game is released, it is very hard to put out those criticisms without people jumping down your throat, right? I mean, people do not want to hear that negative criticism because there's excitement and you understand it to a certain point, but at the same time there's a lot of constructive criticism and fair critique that is shut down in those first couple of weeks. So that's why it's always important to continually evaluate the games and amend your impressions and keep talking about the games as we continue to play them. These are first impressions, once again. I also want to mention that the modding community is already tipping off for 2K23. Shout out to Luya, as always, has already got the NBA 2K hook updated for 2K23, so people are already working on mods and developing resources and whatnot. I'm sure the goods, TG So Good, I'm sure he's going to be furnishing us with some tutorials and whatnot this year. He's already been doing deep dives into menus and content and everything. So that's really great to see the community is right on top of that.
Oh, 100% agree. We have a modder also at PHILLEIM2K who does draft classes. And I think he's already gotten started. And draft classes are always important to the community. They're a huge hit when they're posted on the NLSC or elsewhere and whatnot, and people love looking at well put together draft classes. So yeah, shout out to Luya, shout out to Sticky Fingers, who's also already gotten his hands on the game and is starting to mod as well. And yeah, the community never does an amaze, right?
Oh, no.
When it comes to creating tools. Yeah, when it comes to creating tools for the community to use, releasing them for free, which is always the goal, creating great mods and everything for the community to, use and keep the experience fresh and everything. So I love the community, and I think they do a great job.
And just a quick PSA for anyone who's listening. Once again, please make use of our upload facilities. At the very least, you can add links to your site or wherever you're hosting the files. You can do that as well. But we do offer those upload facilities so that we can preserve those files. We've had a couple of issues in recent times. Please don't upload text files with a download link. So you're running people through a couple of different downloads, or running people through multiple links, linking to a YouTube and then to a ad link and then Mediafire and everything else. If you're going to do that, please don't upload that to our download section. That's kind of it's not a good practice, quite frankly. So please be respectful of your audience, of mod users, and of us, of course, on the site. So if you are going to use our facilities, don't just upload text files with links. Either upload the file or add the direct link as an external link.
Yeah, I think that I'd like to see more of the modding community use the download section. Definitely. In order to preserve these mods, because they're not going to go anywhere as long as they're on the site. If you're using Mediafire or you're using Mega or something like that, if those facilities go away,
which they have in the past, your mods are gone. And people are going to click on those links if they're still in the forum, and they're not going to work. Or if a modder decides to remove them from their Mediafire or Mega to create more space, they're gone, right? They're not in the downloads facility for people to still get their hands on. So I really implore the NLSC community to try to use those downloads, the NLSC download facilities, as much as possible. And of course, we have a forum, we have a Discord. You can find the link to the Discord in the forum. We probably should push that a little bit more, but you can find that in the forum. And of course, we encourage you to join in the discussion in the NLSC forum. We've got a great community there, knowledgeable people, passionate about basketball games. Please join in the conversation. We're going to have a lot of content about 2K23 this year, I feel, especially with how positive we are on our first impressions of the game. But to that end, if you have any requests or suggestions for original content you'd like to see us try our hand at for this year for 2K23, please let us know. And that goes for all of our original content, of course. We're always open to topic suggestions for my articles or the podcast, of course. But yeah, definitely let us know about 2K23. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, MBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. But Derek, you said you had a pros and cons list, so let's get into yours first.
Perfect. Yeah, so I actually have a pretty lengthy pros list. So I want to go over those, and I'll pause in between to kind of get your ideas on the item that I present as well. And we'd love to hear from the community too. Our next mailbag for the next episode is going to be asking you what your 2K23 first impressions are and how you're feeling about the game, on the sticks, presentation wise, etc. So we're looking forward to hear from you, and we hope that our feedback is also incredibly helpful. So pros for next gen NBA 2K23. Best looking 2K on PS5, Xbox Series X Gen. So the game graphics overall looks a lot more natural, in my opinion, this year. I think they got rid of the oversaturated look for the most part. Looks like they added a little bit of fog too into the game, kind of 2K14-esque. And the action can kind of look breathtaking in a way when you're playing like on certain camera views, like the broadcast camera, the side camera, nosebleeds with zoom 1, height 1, etc. The graphics definitely look improved, in my opinion, overall from 2K22, and that's something that popped out to me right away.
I have mixed feelings kind of about the graphics, which is funny because I'm usually not a big graphics critic when it comes to that, but I think it's because I'm coming from 2K14, which had a very vibrant color palette, that it feels a little bit more washed out compared to that. But I do agree that it doesn't look as saturated as previous games, so that is an improvement in that respect. I have no, I mean, I wasn't thinking, oh, these are tremendous graphics or necessarily the best of this generation, but at the same time, I have no complaints, if that makes sense.
Well, I want to make a point too, and I said this to somebody else on Twitter. It does look washed out often, but I think that the overall look is still better than 2K22. I don't think it's the best looking basketball video game of all time at all angles, right? I think that NBA 2K14, from a color palette standpoint, from an overall reflection standpoint, lighting standpoint, I think that still probably looks better than NBA 2K23 next gen. Even something as simple like on NBA 2K14 as the jersey movement, right? Like on NBA 2K23 next gen, the jerseys look like they're stuck to the players, right?
Yes.
And the players are also lacking muscle definition, et cetera. But on NBA 2K14, the players seem to have a little bit more life to them. That there's some jersey movement. There seems to be more physics related to the players in that regard. And I still think that overall the color palette and lighting is better. But I do think that it's the best looking 2K on next gen that they've had. Like, I enjoy looking at it the most, so I consider that a pro.
No, that's fair. And of course, I'm sure you'll get into it shortly, but the presentation, the retro presentation for the Jordan Challenge, which I've just dived into last night, is just incredible. You know, we saw it in previews and it looked great there, but you can really appreciate the era specific in MyNBA Eras and the Jordan Challenge alike. You can really appreciate the work that's gone into that. It's tremendous.
Oh, they went all out. They went all out with that. Another thing that is a pro on my list is related to presentation. Amazing new replays. How good do those look? You know, and I'm not just talking about when you go into instant replay and, you know, you can select your camera view and whatnot. I'm talking about like the replays right after you make a basket and whatnot. It looks cinematic. It looks dramatic. It looks excellent in regular motion, and then when they go into the slow motion, whether it's zoomed in or zoomed out, etc. Amazing job on the instant replays. My brother and I noticed it immediately and thought it looked amazing. Now, another awesome touch is when you go into instant replay and you push L3, you get all of these cinematic replay options. And I got to tell you, it's some of the coolest stuff. It's one of the coolest things I've ever seen, as far as the different angles, the lighting surrounding those cinematic replays when you push L3 and whatnot. And some people have been posting videos of it and screenshots of it, etc. on Twitter, and I'm just like, this is so cool. I wish I could put that feature in so many different past basketball games.
Definitely, and these are the little details that we really appreciate for years of basketball gaming. Just adding little things like that. They're the touches that make it special, make it exciting when you go back and watch those great plays again. And to that point, I also love in the Jordan Challenge how you can turn the retro filter on and off in the instant replay. If you want to get a great crisp screenshot of 1982 MJ instead of the more pixelated 1982 television quality presentation, that filter, you can turn that filter off and get a clearer screenshot, and that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's those little things, right?
Yeah.
Those little things that enhance the experience. And I think also presentation-wise in NBA 2K23, as far as like interruptions, which you've experienced and talked about in the past, they're very minimal. I feel like the action flows very well. There's not too many interruptions, between, possessions or plays or players trying to find the out of bounds line in order to pass it in. There's not like, commercials being shoved into your face or advertisements or anything like that, throughout the game. Like overall, other than like the mobile one instant replay, right?
Of
Like
course,
stuff like that.
yeah.
But like overall, I feel like the gameplay, like when you're in a game, that it flows well. And I think that's important to have minimal interruptions because people don't want all that other unnecessary crap.
That's actually an underrated improvement over the years. Again, because I've been playing so much 2K14, that even by that time, there was still a lot of, if there's a loose ball, the player casually jogging all the way to half court to scoop up the loose ball and then jogging back. That's something they've actually cleaned up over the years, and I don't think we've really touched on it that much. But that is an improvement that we've seen a lot of in a very pleasing improvement we've seen rather in recent games. And yeah, as you say, it does really help the flow.
Yeah, you didn't like the NBA Live 2000 like 15 to 20 second wait between free throws, where the guy was like,
that's the worst. I love 2000. I love NBA Live 2000. It is a classic, a bona fide classic. But yeah, around that time, 99 had the same problem as well. But 2000, it felt like you say, it felt like an eternity between free throw attempts, and it is even if you turn off cutscenes, it still takes ages. And yeah, so that kind of stuff, you like what they're going for immersion, but it just slows the game down so much. So yeah, they've really improved on that.
Yeah. And so another pro that I have, and this is actually more related to gameplay, is I think the dribbling is tighter this year than it was on 2K22. I think that it is more complicated and there's a higher learning curve around it because, initiating a size up is a little bit more complicated. There's now, momentum dribbles that remind me a little bit of like NBA Live 15 and NBA Live 16 in movement that you can at times accidentally initiate and your player just goes flying forward with his dribble. And you're like, wait a minute, that's not what I meant to do. Like that looks awkward. But I think that overall dribbling is kind of fun. And I almost feel like learning the dribbling and, slowly getting better at it is kind of fun. So I would say that dribbling this year overall so far is a plus.
And I have to say that even though there is that learning curve, it doesn't feel so steep. I've seen some people saying it's steep, but I've obviously been playing 2K a long time, so not to brag about my abilities or make some outrageous claims about my skill level, but if you are experienced with 2K, you will pick it up fairly quickly still. It's very familiar, which as it should be. And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead to your cons list here, but I feel the adrenaline boost actually is working out okay. I was very concerned that it might be too impactful, but unless you're just holding down turbo, holding down sprint, there you see how long I've been playing basketball games and I'm calling it turbo, not sprint. But if you hold down sprint for constantly and just without a clever usage of sprint, then yes, you are going to use up those adrenaline boosts and your sprint meter too quickly. But if you are playing within rhythm and using it effectively, it doesn't seem to have a negative impact. Now, I was concerned about that, but so far so good.
That was my next pro, Andrew. It's almost like you have my sheet in front of you.
There you go.
No, the adrenaline meter is a pro. I think that it encourages more realistic play. It discourages over dribbling. It discourages dribbling frantically for no reason, which so many people like to do. It discourages the whole stupid dribbling in place for 10 or 15 seconds, right? And then trying to make a move. I think what it is it encourages, properly sequencing, a dribble move together in order to beat your guy or create space. And then if you can't get by him, you do what you should do in like real basketball and pass it off.
Yes.
Pass it off, and, it creates just a more realistic experience on the virtual hardwood. I do not think in any way that it was implemented poorly. At least going by my experiences so far. And of course, I've only used regular NBA teams and classic teams and whatnot, but I've never been hindered by it. And I've been posting highlights and whatnot on current gen and next gen and everything. And honestly, I think that was a pro. So that was definitely my next one. So my next pro is, some of the animation sequences are breathtakingly real. For example, a well-executed step back into a shot or a quick crossover into a drive, and then just some of the animations around the rim in general. They look great when you do them in real time. a lot of the time. And then also when, you go into that instant replay, whether it's the auto replay that plays in the game or you go into the instant replay function in the game. I'm going to have to share I was playing Team USA 2012 versus Team USA 2016. And I was using Kobe a lot, like I usually do. And I was pulling off a bunch of stuff with him, getting by my man on the perimeter and finishing either alone or in traffic. And just some of these finishes look absolutely awesome. I got to be honest, they just look really cool. And I think that that's another really strong point of this game. I feel like the game is smoother. And maybe you experience that as well. I hate to use this word, but it used to be used all the time. It feels less janky. Let's put it that way.
I get that. No, I've definitely felt that, and there are some legacy issues with. I still feel like the CPU is maybe a step or two quicker at times, but if you are using dribbling moves effectively and the sprint effectively, then it is less of an issue than in years past. At least in my early impressions, anyway. And yeah, but going back to the sprint meter, it is so impressive that they got it right the first time. And I know that sounds like I'm damning them with faint praise, but historically, you look at both Live and 2K, whenever they introduce a new feature like that, there's always the potential that it's not going to be quite right at launch. Or in recent years, they can buff and nerf the effectiveness of things, so it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. But, I mean, Freestyle Superstars in Live 06, we were stuck with how effective or overpowering those moves were. That didn't change throughout the year. With the mechanics these days, they can change the effectiveness, but I don't think they should touch that at all. And I think that's actually a lot of people are saying that. Please do not touch the game too much. This is some of the best the game has felt at launch. Now, give it a couple of weeks, we might see some more issues. But the fact that there's so many positive impressions from the whole community, really is very promising. So yes, we don't want them to be doing too much tinkering this year.
Can we please make it like it used to be and just kind of like keep the game the way it is out of the box, please? Because it creates more frustration in the community when you constantly change things, because then their experience changes drastically, right?
Well, here's the thing. I've said it before, is that the only reason they really changed that so much is the online scene, right? Not to call out online gamers, but I will, kind of. They're the ones that want to do the cheesy moves. They're the ones that want to dribble 100 times behind the back, behind a screen, and green the three-pointer, right? So they're the ones that are going to be complaining about skill gaps and this needs to be buffed and nerfed and whatever. So it's trying to cater to that crowd. And here's the thing. If there's an upside, if there's a silver lining to not having competition in the space, and there's not many, as we've said before, we want that competition there, but if there is an advantage, because they have such control of the market, the 2K can say to the cheesers, get good, guys. You have to. This is the experience we want to present this year and moving forward, and you have to adjust, because they're the ones that are always saying adjust, the cheesers and whatnot. So I'm all in favor of 2K throwing it right back at them and saying, this is the experience we want. People are happy with this. You need to adjust. You need to get good at actual basketball strategy.
Can I just bring something up, too? The cheesers don't make up the majority of 2K gamers.
Exactly.
They're just the loudest.
Exactly. Yes.
Right? So,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, that's the one of the points I want to make. Stop listening to the cheesers. Stop listening to the people that want to play minority, like that. Yeah. Because, right, exactly. Because those, you don't hear from the people that aren't cheesing. Right. Yes. Unless they're complaining about the cheesers. So let's pump the brakes on trying to, patch everything for that loud minority.
100%.
The next pro that I have, and this is a big one for me. I brought this up on the podcast many times. The face-up game is back. Like overall, getting somebody in the high post with your defender on your back and then facing up on him and then trying to execute a move. You're not being dragged into slow motion side-by-sides, right? Like, this is one of my biggest problems. You're not constantly dropping the ball. And I think that is a huge improvement because it brings the mid-range game back. It brings that high post game back, which are huge parts of basketball. And so, I was testing it out and I was putting Kevin Durant and Kobe Bryant and whatnot on the elbows, and I would face up my guy and I would, do a juke or, try to get by him, or I would try to step back, or I would, try to spin off of him and everything. And I'm not being frustrated by it. Right. And that's because it seems, remember, I did no slider tweaks. This is with no slider tweaks, default gameplay. They removed a lot of the suction as it relates to that. They gave you more freedom to play like a real basketball player. And I think that that goes such a long way for me. It goes such a long way for my brother and whatnot when we're playing these games. And I think it's going to go a long way for the community because it opens up the floor more, right? It's not just trying to, do a step back three or trying to like get a three, and it's not avoiding the high post or avoiding the post and all of that stuff. You can actively try to go to those areas and attack as long as you're using the right player and the right strategy. So that was a huge pro for me, and I'll have to display some of the highlights that I was doing from the high post because I think that they could be helpful for the community as well. But yeah, what an improvement there.
And it's not a case where you can just constantly drive by a defender, just blow by them with like a 2K18 or like a 2K21, I think had that issue as well. But certainly 2K18 is kind of the most triumphant example of that hip riding and blow-bys that were very overpowered. I mean, you can do it if you've got a great slasher and you're effectively using sprint and whatnot, but it doesn't happen constantly, as it shouldn't.
Right. And I wanted to make another point about gameplay as well that I found as a pro. I don't know if you experienced this, but it sounds like maybe you did. The shooting feels good this year.
Yes.
Overall, there were people, I was reading about people saying how hard the shooting was. They were talking about how, they went like 2 for 20 or something like that, or they couldn't hit shots and the timing is weird and everything. I don't use the meter. You know that. I don't use it when I first boot up the game. I don't use it ever. I just don't like the shot meter. I only use it in NBA 2K19 season with Stildo because he wanted to use it. So I was like, all right, we'll both use it because you want to. But shooting overall, the release point seems like it makes sense. Shooting feels pretty damn fluid overall, animation-wise, for at least the current players. I'm going to get into the classic players and the cons in a minute. But I overall felt enjoyment getting a shot off, and I think that's good.
That was one of the first things I said to you after we were talking about it in our chat. I said that I really liked shooting this year. It felt better. And shooting in 2K22 was one of my big pet peeves. I did not like the feel of the wind-up of that long meter, which even if you have the meter off, it's still the same mechanics. So I didn't like the overall mechanics last year. I feel that this year it is very reliant on getting that green release, but at the same time, if you do have good timing, you can get that really well-timed release fairly often and do your damage with jump shots, as you should be able to do. So, again, coming from 2K14, I know I'm saying this a lot, but again, there's a lot of adjustments I have to make coming from those mechanics to this one. Sometimes I do release late, because 2K14, at least with my player, had longer timing on shooting, but to that point, there's also, at least on current gen, I might be there on next gen as well, I didn't look, I was just in the options before we started recording on PC, but there is actually an option for whether you prefer late releases or earlier releases on your shot timing. So you can even adjust that on top of having different meters. And of course, there's different sound effects and splash effects on green releases. And I don't miss not seeing the green release feedback until after the shot. That's a nice way of not telegraphing the result.
Well, I don't have to look at that anyway because I turn all gameplay indicators off.
But
yeah, I know I always hated that, and I hate it in me and Ken's season. Stildos on 2K19 because you see it and it's like, why would I even box out or go for this rebound? I already know it's going in, which is just unrealistic and silly. I've always thought that was unrealistic and silly about the green releases and how that worked and whatnot. I think that it's sometimes an adjustment going from game to game. For example, in these newer 2Ks with this new motion system, shooting often feels a little bit more rushed than a game like, say, 2K17. So, like, when we go, I think 2K17 has possibly the best shooting ever in the series. I think we've talked about that before. I think you agree.
We have, I agree.
Yeah, the shooting is so good in 2K17 related to timing, the animations, and all of that stuff. But in NBA 2K17, the release is later than it would be in NBA 2K23. So there's always going to be that adjustment for us as well because we still spend our most time on 2K17.
And a good tip that I saw from Beluba, Mike Wong, of course, the gameplay director of 2K, that I saw on Twitter, he mentioned that if the defender is closing in, the shot meter or the timing is faster and slower if you're wide open. So that makes sense, and that's also something to keep in mind. If you're releasing a bit late on a contested shot, note that it will, when you're being contested, it will go quicker, and when you're wide open, it will go slower. So if you're releasing early or late, that's something to keep in mind. That's a good tip, and I think that works because you do want to release quicker if a defender is closing in.
Yeah, if somebody's closing out on you, you're obviously instinctively, if you've ever played basketball, before, in fear of getting blocked or trying, you want to get your shot off quicker. You will release it a little bit quicker. Not all the time, but that can happen. So yeah, I don't think that's an unrealistic implementation. It's something that you can adjust to as well. It almost comes natural, etc. I also like I think the quick play calling is good in next gen. It's not good in current gen, PC, Xbox One, PS4. I really like the play calling on next gen. And then another improvement that I noticed is the players go into motion a lot faster, it seems, in NBA 2K23 over NBA 2K22 when you call a play. And it's really fun to stand there at the top of the key like I was when I was using Team USA with Chris Paul and watching, LeBron set a down screen for Durant. Durant curls off. If I don't hit Durant on that first option, I'll see a screen set on the opposite side of the floor for Kobe, and then he'll curl off. And the beauty of it is, and they do this better in NBA 2K23 almost than any 2K that's ever, come out for the series, is they can lose their guy, right? And if they do curl off correctly, like if Kobe curls off that down screen correctly, you can see his defender realistically caught up on that screen. And if you time your pass right to Kobe on the perimeter, he has a wide open shot and his defender is left scrambling trying to reach him. So it seems like play calling is smoother. It seems like the players go into motion faster. It is actually fun to run plays in NBA 2K23. So I found myself doing that and just watching the players off the ball moving around. So I don't know how much play calling you did, whether it be quick plays or regular plays, but I think that was an improvement.
I haven't actually called that many so far. I want to check that out now. But the reason I didn't is because, again, coming from 2K14, I was forgetting the play calling button, actually, in 2K23. Again, I hadn't adjusted to those controls, so I do want to check that out. And that's what you want to see. You want to see that movement off the ball. You want to see players having that brain. We talked about that for years. It's something that's been in so many developer blogs and previews for Live and 2K throughout the years, giving players a brain, making them move without the ball and have awareness of their setting. And you do see that in 2K23, and that is very pleasing. And I know that's people like Desire are very much into that play calling side of things, and I know that's very much his baby. So I mean that's great to see.
And another thing too that for people that don't want to run their own plays a lot, if you put offensive play calling in your coach settings to auto, I think by default it's manual. If you turn that to auto, you can see the players go into motion when you cross half court or when you get into a certain spot on the court, and you can kind of tell what play is being run. And you can hit players off screens. You can hit the wing and then drop it into the post, etc. So one thing that my brother and I really like to do is we do quick plays all the time. And, we'll every now and then we'll run a floppy or something like that out of the play call menu. But we like offensive play calling being set to auto. So when we're playing on the same team or when we're playing against each other, those players aren't just standing around, right? They're going to go in motion. And I feel like it's really well executed. It feels like in NBA 2K23 when it's on auto, you can see the players running different stuff and everything, and you can kind of just flow with the offense.
And that focus on the NBA side of things, that strategic approach, the simnation of it all, this has been a concern of ours, that they've been moving away from that they've been focusing on non-basketball aspects. Crocs, 15,000 BC in the neighborhood and the city this year, by the way. I'll pass on that, but no, they actually have been putting a lot of attention to that. It's very obvious. They've nailed down some tech in that regard. So again, it's great to see that realism come in, that basketball strategy come in, and to be rewarded for playing strategically is the big thing, especially in the NBA side of things against a CPU or against another user, of course. I mean, it goes online. You've got these souped up my players. It does change the the gameplay somewhat, but that core experience, that core NBA experience feels pretty solid this year, at least with teams and players that have the right ratings and tendencies, which I'm sure we'll get into with the cons list coming up.
Right, and I think a lot of that stuff, too, that we're talking about also presents itself as true skill gap.
Yes.
Right, like being able to, sure, they're going to run that play and whatnot, but are you going to hit the right guy off the screen, and are you going to hit him at the right time? And when he catches the ball, are you going to shoot it right? Or are you going to make the right decision when you catch in general? So like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about it presents more of a true skill gap than what we've had in the past. So hopefully some of that translates to online play as well, when we were talking about, maybe a little bit more complicated but tighter dribbling controls, et cetera. Being able to utilize the face-up game, being able to do a little bit more in the post without being sucked in everywhere, being able to play more realistic style defense and whatnot. My next pro as well is current teams overall on default sliders, when you throw them on the floor, are fun and the players play to their strengths. And my brother and I went onto the floor. He was using the Warriors. I was using the Pelicans, and we, played a couple quarters, and they're playing to their strengths. The players are playing to their strengths. They're playing in realistic spots where they would normally play on the floor and whatnot. And there's obviously some cons related to the defense because of the sliding. Sometimes PNRs are a little bit too easy to run, it seems. Defensive players just awkwardly moving out of position for no reason, or awkwardly not being able to turn to cover their man, etc. A lot of motion, like 2K18 motion system stuff still in there. This kind of brings down, plays from time to time. But overall, default sliders, not turning down body up sensitivity, not, adjusting acceleration, speed, all of that stuff. Overall, using the current teams is pretty fun. And I know you haven't been able to use the current teams yet because you spent time with the 96 Sonics and Bulls, but I'm curious to hear what you say when you do.
Yeah, I've mostly been playing retro so far, and of course MyTEAM as well, and a little bit of, or at least checking out the city in my career. I haven't played a my career game yet to see how that goes with the default 60 overall, the base 60 overall. Not well, I imagine. It rarely is, but no, I do see those improvements. I do want to get into the into current teams as well, but first impressions of gameplay pretty positive. One of the cons that I would guess for you, I mentioned the fact that they've taken away the telegraphing of the green release until after the shot goes up, but there is still on next gen that camera cut to when you take a three and green a three, and it does that camera cut to the cinematic angle. That's still in there by default. You can turn that off, I believe, but that is still in there. So they've still got that telegraphing it.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that being a default setting. I went into the controller settings and whatnot immediately and turned that off. Like I tried just go in there. It's kind of habit now. You go in and turn off the the shot meter and those cutscenes and whatnot. One bonus I will say is that it's actually saving your settings this year for both player 1 and player 2. It seems like the controller settings, as far as I always change the controls to camera relative and whatnot because I play on broadcast, and when I boot up the game again, boom, my controller settings saved. So I know that seems like a small thing, but so many times on NBA 2K22, it would just reset back everything to absolute, and it would have the shot meter on, all of that stuff.
Bug fixes are always appreciated. That's what we want to see year to year. If they can't fix it in a patch, at least fix it up in the next game. So, yeah, that's good.
Right. So another pro, I only have a few more left. Another pro is just the Jordan Challenge and Eras presentations. I have quite a few issues as far as the way the classic teams are made again. I'll get into that when we get to the con section and whatnot. But if we're talking from a presentation standpoint, whether it be the ESPN presentation, the NBC presentation, all of that stuff, they really nailed it. They nailed it with the filters as well, giving the game the look of the era and whatnot. And they should be, they should get kudos for that. They should get props for that because they didn't have to do that, right? They didn't have to go all out with that, but they did, and I think it looks really good.
Above and beyond, to use the title of a great MJ VHS tape from back in the day, they really did go above and beyond with the presentation aspects. From the documentaries of the Jordan Challenge as well. And I know we're still on pros at the moment. If I do have to mention one criticism I have with the Jordan Challenge, and I understand why they did it, is that it goes through sequentially, that you have to start with the 82 game and unlock the rest. And I know that it makes sense because they're presenting it in a documentary style with all the clips and the interviews and everything in between, and that's and it makes sense. And I don't dislike it per se, but at the same time, I think there is value in being able to, like the original Jordan Challenge, start with whatever game you want. I mean, I'm a big fan of having that choice, so that's kind of a quibble for me, but it's a bug. It's a pet peeve in the grand scheme of things because I see what they're going for as far as guiding you through this interactive documentary. You talk about interactive almanacs, interactive documentary of Jordan's career. So I see why they did it, but I do like the idea of having the choice there.
Yeah, in my opinion, I actually like the way they did it, and the reason is it kind of reminds me of old school modes in older games, where you have to kind of climb your way out of it and whatnot, and climb your way to the new experiences. So I definitely see where you're coming from, because choice is always great, right? But it kind of reminds me of the old harder learning curve and the harder modes in older games. But I definitely see where you're coming from. The other
playing in
piece
sequence,
too,
playing in sequence, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. It's just I think also because if there's one thing I don't like about domination in MyTEAM, it's that you can't pick the division you start with or the teams that you start with. That remains a pet peeve of mine with MyTEAM, and I think it's kind of I just like having that choice in modes. But it does make sense for the interactive documentary aspect, and also, as you say, playing it like a game from start to finish rather than just jumping around randomly. It makes sense. I can't deny that.
Right, and speaking of which, with MyTEAM, I definitely will be getting into that and sharing footage this year. I think it's something that I think the mode will play well, because I think the game overall plays well out of the box. So I'm definitely going to be jumping into that. So I have a couple more. One, I'm going to go back to gameplay. I think collisions at the hoop feel less canned this year. I feel like there's some really good collision animations. I feel like there's a little bit less going through other players' bodies. Limbs going through other players' bodies. And of course, not as much suction, which makes collisions at the rim feel more organic and whatnot. I love getting by my defender with, I don't know, let's say Brandon Ingram. I like getting by my defender and then jumping into and absorbing contact at the rim, and he kind of adjusts his shot and he's able to finish it. And I think that looks the best that's looked in years.
I love some of those collisions in the game against the 96 Bulls versus 96 Sonics. I had Pippen, not controlled by me, but controlled by the CPU, just absolutely clobber Kemp to stop him from getting to the rim, and it was a nasty looking collision, and it looked really good.
Yeah, and I think that goes a long way with, again, making the experience feel organic and making you feel like you have more control
and physicality over
what's going on. Yeah, exactly. Which is part of the sport. It's not as much part of the sport today, but there still is some of that. You can't take that out. So, so the last couple that I have for pros, there's a nifty new feature to roster editing, where you can go into edit player and you can just use L2 or R2 to cycle through the players while you're in the edit player screen. And I think that's a nice touch. That's really good for modders. You don't have to exit that specific player, then go choose another player, and then go into edit player again. You literally can just say, go into Steph Curry on the Warriors, edit player, then hit a bumper, hit L2 or R2, and then it sends you to Klay Thompson. Then it sends you to Andrew Wiggins, and then it sends you to Draymond Green. And I think that it's those little touches that make editing rosters a lot easier, and it's those little quality of life changes.
Yes.
Right, that can go a long way.
And that reminds me a lot of the old NBA Live games. Remember Edit Player in Live 2001 through to 2004? You could change plays. You just save the changes and go to the next one. So that's one of those old features that was very useful back in the day. I love seeing little things like that brought back in modern games, because they are, as you say, quality of life improvements. So they're always welcome. They're another little detail that they don't go on the back of the box. They're not going to go in many developer blogs, but once you dive into a game and see them, you're a passionate gamer, you dive into that and see those little features that as a basketball gamer and a roster editor as well, that really help in those situations, you just appreciate them so much.
No, 100%. So here's my last pro, at least for now, Andrew. Obviously, we're going to have future impressions on the podcast and whatnot. I think that some of the face improvements are unreal, like excellent. The new Patrick Ewing, I don't know if you looked at that, but it is true to life as they've ever had Patrick Ewing.
Yeah.
The new Vlade Divac looks absolutely awesome. It's the best Vlade Divac I think they've ever had in the game. Cliff Robinson, I believe Razor posted that. I think that was his work. He looks exactly like Cliff Robinson. It is an excellent Cliff Robinson. So there's definitely pros and cons to the classic team's faces. And, you know, there's a lot of fakes. There's a lot of the new players they added, like Walter McCarty, that instead of putting in a real face for him, they have a generic guy in there that looks nothing like him and whatnot. But with some of the faces, I think that they knocked it out of the park with some of the new ones.
I've noticed some of that as well going through the rosters, and that's always welcome. They do stick out when they're bad, and there are some ones that we will criticize in the cons list, I'm sure. But no, there's a lot of pros right there, and I'll add that I'm having a blast with my team so far. Not having contracts, you know, we talked about it when we were reacting to the developer blog on my team, and noted how much of a big improvement that was. It really is not having to worry about that, freeing that up in packs, not having to worry about contracts, not having an item in limited packs, limited number of cards in the packs taken up by another consumable. I mean, I'm not a big fan of consumables in my team anyway. I would happily get rid of them, but I know they're too ingrained. Things like adding badges and shoes and whatnot. I would honestly take out the injury cards out of my team. I don't think they balance the game that well. I don't think if it's already a fantasy mode, you can go with no injuries. I feel that's just the argument I make, because everybody says, "Oh, it's okay if you have OP cards because it's a fantasy mode." Well, if it's a fantasy mode, you can take out injuries, I'm sure, because they don't balance it that much. So that's beside the point. But I really like the way they're approaching the challenges this year. All the sub modes, the use of tokens to get packs rather than just have to grind for a bunch of tokens to unlock the same collection or a very similar collection of players every year. They're using tokens more effectively this year, I feel. Unfortunately, from the looks of things, there's already people farming MT and paying for MT, because within the first day there were cards going for 379,000 MT. There's no way you can get that in the first day of playing the game. So that's still an issue with the auction house. The prices, there's just no regulation there, no control over that. The auction house doesn't work as well as it could, because those cards are being sold for millions of MT towards the end. At the moment, hundreds of thousands, more than you can make in less than 12 hours with the game. So there are still issues there, but I do love the way they've approached it. With the Ascension, I do like that it... I can't remember if in 2K22 they did this last year or whether it was an improvement this year, but not being taken back down to the bottom board when you go through... There's different Ascensions. A few different times you can do Ascensions through leveling up in the season levels in my team. And I can't remember if it was last year or maybe it's an improvement this year, but not being taken back down to the bottom board. If you make it to the top, if you make it to the sky, the big board, then the next time you get Ascension, when you level up, you are there on the top board. So that is and you don't have to go through the rigmarole of advancing to the next board and right up to the top again through the 3 levels. So that's a great improvement. This last year or this year, either way, I love that they've got that in 2K23. And just the general approach to my team, I think, is very solid. My career, again, haven't dived right into that yet. The story is whatever. I'm not liking the amount of unlikable characters already. That's been one of my biggest problems with previous my career stories, is when it's just felt like you're just dealing with so many jerks that it's you just want to get through the story as quickly as possible. The city is what it is. It is a bit smaller. It is, I guess, a bit easier to navigate, but you still need to bring up the map. I'm old school in that I would prefer menus. I think there's still too much extracurricular stuff, but it's not too bad. Ridiculous prices of ridiculous VC prices of various cosmetic items. No surprise there. Par for the course at this point, but no, it looks solid enough. I will have to circle back and give more impressions in the weeks to come. But no, first impressions overall. I think I'm going to be playing 2K23 quite a lot over the next few months, and probably all the way through to the next release. Although I will be, as you said at the top of the show, we will be sprinkling in our retro gaming because we love that so much. But my first impressions are that I'm going to be playing 2K23 quite regularly on current gen and next gen. So that's really, that feels really good to come in with that positivity especially after I was looking forward to it and hoping for the best and feeling cautiously optimistic. I feel like that was well placed.
I love it. Yeah, no, that's great, and I look forward to the footage and whatnot. I will say one thing before I get into my cons about my career. I've never thought that a map would be needed for a basketball game. I never thought it was necessary. I never thought that RPG elements should be added to a basketball video game, and it just kind of, in my opinion, in a way, kind of cheapens the experience and makes it less about basketball. But, yeah, I like that I can avoid, the unlikable characters and whatnot and kind of the cheesy, scripted storylines and all of that. That's not something that interests me. So I'm glad that there's a lot of offline content and, whatever is online, there's some parts of it that I can enjoy, whether it be in my team or whatnot. So I'm glad that the game is full of content.
Definitely.
Let's put it that way.
That is the strength of 2K for many years, is that there has been something for everyone, usually. And I will say that there are fast travel points around the city. That is something that's mentioned in the blog. Obviously, some news coming through between last show and this show because we had the daily news drop coming up to release day, to 2K Day, and that kind of helps. I'm still under the impression that you have to run to the arena to play games rather than just select it from a menu. I may be wrong. Again, I haven't played deep enough into the mode to see. I don't like the idea of having to travel to the arena to play games. I like to jump into things very quickly, which you may still be able to do. I know you can go there and do some quests, and look, it's impressive. It's impressive the detail they've gone to, and I see what they're going for. But even going back to some of the wrestling games I played in the mid-2000s where they'd drop you into the backstage and you had to run around the backstage, it felt like busy work and padding a lot of the time. So I've never been a huge fan of that experience outside of, Fallout and GTA, they're meant to be open world games. So that's where I love a big world to explore. Basketball games, wrestling games, not so much. But I'll come back to that. I'll circle back to that with more impressions after I've played a little bit more and see how things work and see what shortcuts there are, because those shortcuts are very important. But yeah, that being said, there are some cons.
Yeah, so let's get to the constructive critique part of this podcast and NBA 2K23. So my first con is still quite a bit of sliding, quite a bit of skating. In fact, it might be a little worse than 2K22 next gen. It's really tough to plant your feet in that game. And as frustrating as it is on offense, it can be even more frustrating on defense because all you're trying to do is, plant your feet, slide, and, stay in front of your man. And you can't because you're skating or floating above the court, it seems like often. I feel like, trying to stop on a dime and take a shot sometimes feels like an exercise in frustration because of, the lack of proper foot planning and whatnot. And actually, that's a strength in comparison on NBA 2K23 for PC. The foot planning is a bit better. My brother and I noticed it immediately. And because of that, we were having a little bit more fun on the sticks on the PC version and whatnot. So there, hey, you know what? You got something to look forward to, current gen players, better foot planning. But yeah, I think skating and sliding has been an issue for the series ever since they implemented the new motion system in 2K18. And you remember all the comments about how they were going to be able to make foot planning better once they got on next gen. Remember there was that whole thing in the developer blog and everything. And then it hasn't improved. If anything, it's, I would say, on par with 2K19, if not worse on defense. I feel like defensive foot planning in NBA 2K23 is worse, and then on offense, it's like for NBA 2K19, it seems like the skating is a little bit more impactful, a little bit worse. So I don't think they've improved the foot planning at all, actually, on the next gen series of 2Ks.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And as I said, it still feels, to me at least, that there are some issues with player speed. It feels like the user control player is much slower than the CPU, or let's say much. I should say noticeably slower, at least a couple of steps slower. Reactions and movement. It still felt like there was a bit of catching up happening on the break. On a couple of times when I've got out on a long pass, on a long outlet pass, and I'm on the break and have a wide open dunk, and the defender's rushing down on me. And I know you can run quicker without the ball than with it, but it still didn't feel quite right. It still felt like the CPU was a little bit more reactive, a little faster than the players that I was controlling, and some of the reactions a little bit slow turning and getting that explosive movement compared to the CPU. It wouldn't be so bad if the CPU was also similarly hampered, realistically hampered, I should say, as far as being able to take off from at speed. But it felt.
Oh, they are. They still are. They're still hampered, and they're still hampered with that poor change of direction, even just trying to like turn a corner, which is why they get lost on defense, and you can just blow by them so often in like pick and rolls or like with a quick first step and everything. It's just they haven't gotten the change of direction down yet.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. But so there's some things with player movement that people were saying that it's night and day difference between 2K22 and 2K23. I don't think it's that. I think there is improvement. I do like it better because it's felt better on the sticks. I've been enjoying it more, but I don't think it is this overall improvement that has completely left 2K22 in the dust. There's still some lingering issues with the movement there. There's
still a lot of NBA 2K22 and NBA 2K23.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a completely different experience. You know you're playing 2K, and you know you're playing a game that's incredibly similar to 2K22, let's be honest.
Of course.
From a control perspective, from a presentation perspective, from a skating perspective, from an overall player movement perspective. So let's pump the brakes on it being a totally new gameplay experience. You know what you're playing, right? Yeah. So I want a last point about skating and sliding. It's not just a visual thing. It really impacts control. At times, it impacts flow. It impacts where your player ends up on the floor when you're trying to execute something or even just move around the floor. It impacts your ability to play defense, all of that stuff. So, and there's also a volume difference. So obviously there were instances of skating. It's sliding in like 2K16 or 2K17. However, the volume was so low, and I've shown this on video, like putting them side by side with the newer games. The volume of skating and sliding was so low that it's not something that negatively impacts your gameplay experience. It didn't cause you frustration in those games. Volume matters, and there's a whole hell of a lot more sliding, skating, and floating in the newer ones.
And to your point about it not just being cosmetic, not just being something that's visually distracting, it does affect the gameplay. If you have the ball handler or somebody catching a pass, they slide into position and slide quickly away. They can create space between them and their defender very artificially in what should be a travel by sliding on ice, really, in real life. But they're able to use that to their advantage, and the CPU especially. And as we've said before, sometimes if the player is sliding, they're not moving their feet, so their defender is not tracking them moving, doesn't realize that they're moving. So again, they don't move with them because they're not moving, their feet aren't moving, but they are sliding across the floor, snapping their position for a wide open shot. So things like that, it isn't just visual. Of course, it doesn't look great, it doesn't look as realistic as we'd like, and as I'm sure 2K would like. But the bigger issue is when it does create space artificially like that.
Right. Think about real basketball people. Think about how important foot planning is, and think about how you move around a court. Think about you trying to stop, like plant on your right foot and then move into the opposite direction really quick to stay with the defender. Now think about the way it looks on 2K and how it feels on 2K, where instead of planting that right foot, you move about a couple feet to the right because you slide that way, and then now you're screwed, right? Like there's no way to recover from that. And then when you try to go left again, you're sluggish going to the left and you're sliding too far to the left possibly. So like it's not realistic, and it absolutely affects control. So that's one of the cons. Another con, and I don't know if you noticed this as much, I noticed it immediately. There's a lot of ball warping in this game with dribbles. The ball just transferring hands. The speed of dribbles as a result often looks kind of unrealistic and whatnot. Sometimes your player will dribble and the ball won't even hit the floor. It just like gets suspended right before it hits the ground, and then it pops right back up. into your hand, etc. You can also see quite a bit of ball warping on catch receptions. So like, somebody passes you the ball and you try to receive it, you can see the ball like warp to his hand or warp outside of his hand and then goes right back to his hand. And you can see it sometimes on passes, just like the trajectory of the ball. I think ball warping on dribbling definitely can look really awkward, weird, and unnatural. And that's another thing that actually came with the move to the new motion system.
Yeah, I've noticed some things like that. And of course the usual rebound warping or clipping through hands because it's predetermined that it's going to this person. There are a few moments that don't look as organic as they should.
100%. So another con is the post game still needs work. I think that it's still far behind what we had in NBA 2K17 and NBA 2K16 as far as control, as far as being able to execute a super quick spin move without, the awkward animation that's in the newer games, the ability to roll off your man when you do spin either into the front of, to the front of the rim or to baseline, etc. I think that it's better than it's been over the last couple of years. I also think the face-up game is better than it's been for the last couple of years, but I still think both games are behind what we had prior on NBA 2K17 and 2K16. Like, I don't look forward to playing in the post in the newer games like I did the two that I just mentioned.
Agreed. It's just not as satisfying.
Another con is it seems like the computer still struggles with PNRs. Like oftentimes you'll run a PNR and the defender will like get caught in no man's land completely behind the play, and you're inside the 3-point line. The roll man is inside the 3-point line. He's rolling to the hoop, and somehow, who knows why, the defender is still behind the 3-point line. Like one of the defenders, like he can't change direction properly. He doesn't read it properly, and he's just standing there. I think that overall, you can see a lot of sequences like that in this game where the players just seem to struggle to make basic human movements. And most of the time it's related to acceleration or, trying to change direction. So I was noticing that a little bit when I was playing, and it can be quite the eyesore.
I was going to ask, do you think it's an issue with movement or AI, or maybe a bit of both? Lapses in AI and movement.
That's a great question. I think it's both. I do. I think that the mechanics of the game, the engine of the game, like the player movement engine, doesn't allow the players to change directions in a realistic manner based on the play that's being run. And I also think that there needs to be tweaks behind the scenes to how the player reacts to the play in general. So no, I think it's a combination of both. So another con, and it's kind of related to the same thing, I said players still struggle to round corners realistically due to the motion system that was implemented in 2K18. This creates really awkward looking sequences from the computer when they're just trying to do something as simple as turn around, chase a defender, react quickly, etc. So we already kind of went over that. You can't use era rosters in Play Now. I think that is frustrating because you can go, those rosters are already there, right? They're available to go into edit. Like you can edit the rosters, you can save the rosters. But if you try to bring up those rosters in Play Now, you can't. Like you can't use the 83, you can't use the 92, and you can't use the 2002. So those are stuck to you playing the MyNBA Eras modes. And I think that's a little bit disappointing.
No, it definitely is. And the fact that content isn't available on current gen, except for some players that have been added to the classic teams and the all-time teams, I suppose. Although there's also been a couple that have been lost, unfortunately, or still absent in some cases. So that is unfortunate. And someone brought it up on Reddit that a lot of the filler players, especially on retro teams, are not era appropriate. There's accessories and hairstyles and whatnot that don't fit the era, and they do stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that actually in a moment. So really quick, rosters. So I think I identified why the classic teams play so poorly in comparison to the current teams, why that experience can be so frustrating and just sluggish and blah and just make you want to shut off the game. So I went through a bunch of the teams, a bunch of the classic teams, and I was looking at their physicals. And looking at their physicals, they ignorantly or intentionally, I'm not sure what you want to call it, lazily made players, so many players on the classic teams have physicals of like C- and D or D+, like guys that in no way, shape, or form should have really poor physicals. And I want to give you an idea of what the physicals attribute, like, the grade encompasses. So here's what the physicals grade encompasses. Speed affects how fast the player can run or sprint around the court. Acceleration affects the speed at which the player can move in short bursts and when taking off from a standstill position. Strength determines who wins a contact battle and helps dictate how successful a player will be when backing down or being backed down in the post, both with and without the ball. Vertical, used as a gate for dunk animations and in combination with the attribute counterparts, allows a player to jump higher on rebounds and blocks. And stamina affects how quickly a player loses energy and fatigues while running, sprinting, taking contact, and performing various moves on the court. So a lot goes into that physicals grade, right? So I want to give you a few examples just to kind of give you an idea of why those classic teams are so underdone most of the time and how that why that experience can be so blah. So here's a perfect example. So Mark Price, on the 89-90 Cavaliers, has a D+ on physicals. Now remember all the attributes that go into that grade. Derek White on the Boston Celtics has a B on physicals. Now, you and I watched Mark Price, right? Growing up. Mark Price was incredibly quick.
Yes.
He's quick first step, really quick with his dribble, fast up and down the court overall. He was in no way slow. He wasn't like an unathletic player. And we've watched Derek White in real life. And Derek White is not like a freakishly athletic specimen. But if you use Mark Price on the court, he is going to be much slower and feel poor on the sticks and compared to Derek White. How is that possible and how is that right? When Mark Price, in his own right, like I said, was athletic and quick and whatnot, but also a much better player than Derek White. So that's the example of a role player and a star from a classic team where their physicals are going to make that classic team player not close to as effective.
It explains a lot. It explains a lot right out of the gate that their physical attributes, their athletic attributes, are not what they should be. Of course, they're going to be more sluggish. They're not going to perform as they should. They're not going to be able to compete effectively, and they're going to with the way that speed works this year, especially when bringing the ball up the court and the explosiveness and the adrenaline system. You need to have players at the right speed, because if players do feel too slow without that sprint, you are going to be holding the sprint down more, and then use up those adrenaline boosts and the sprint meter. So it's all connected.
Right. So I want to give you a couple other examples. So Robert Parish, considered one of the best big men ever at running the floor, right? Physical specimen as far as like the way he played, like he was strong. He could compete with, Kareem,
tremendous athlete,
Patrick Ewing, tremendous athlete. I think Bill Walton, I think it was him or somebody else, might have been Casey Jones as well, said that Robert Parish was the best at running the floor of any big man they had ever seen, right? So, and he played a lot of minutes, and he played into old age. Robert Parish's physicals on the 85-86 Celtics are D+. So he's crawling. He is absolutely crawling. Now get this. Clint Capella is a B.
Right, yeah.
So watch Clint Capella and watch Robert Parish run the floor, and watch them two athletically in the way they play, and tell me in any way why Clint Capella should be a much better athlete than Robert Parish. You want to get another funny one that in comparison? So this is all putting it into perspective to why these teams feel poor. Horace Grant is a D-. A D- on physicals. Horace Grant.
Yeah.
He was great at running the floor. You were a Bulls fan.
Yeah.
Great at running the floor. We watched a ton of footage on him. A physical specimen, could play a lot of minutes, played till older age and was still playing minutes and everything, a D- on physicals. But Bam Adebayo is an A on physicals, and Max Struss on the same team is a C. So Horace Grant is going to perform far less as far as his player movement goes as those guys. And we know how gifted Horace Grant was as an athlete. So what I'm looking at when I'm going through these teams is I'm seeing a bunch of important players, a bunch of guys who get minutes on these classic teams, whether it's in the era rosters or in the classic teams and whatnot, who have really poor physicals that shouldn't. For example, I want to give you one more before, I throw it over to you to get your comments on it. Kevin Willis.
Another beast.
How ripped was Kevin Willis? How great of an athlete was 7-foot Kevin Willis? Amazing as far as an athlete. He got up and down the floor. He was incredibly strong. He could make quick moves to the hoop, all of that stuff. Here's Kevin Willis's physical. Is a D-. Rashard Holmes on the Kings is a C+.
Yeah.
Kevin Willis, a starter who plays important minutes on that 85-86 Hawks team that's in the game, a D- on physicals.
I mean, it really, again, it says it all. That they haven't, if you don't get the tendencies and the attributes right, they're not going to play like their real life selves. They're not going to be fun to use because they're just so sluggish, crawling around the court when they absolutely weren't. And you alluded to it. Is it a case of laziness? And I hate to use the word laziness, but you look at some of the copy and paste jobs and the lack of attention to detail, and it feels apt because this is definitely an area where, especially with all the eras that they've put into the game, on top of the classic teams that have been in there for over a decade now, you do need to have that attention to detail. Or, as you alluded to, is it more political? Is it more the case of we're going to make them slower because, the athletes of today are so advanced and so evolved than the plumbers and dentists of of yesteryear? But it doesn't make sense to be celebrating the history of the league with MyNBA Eras and whatnot, and to do that. So I kind of come back to, I mean, it could be a combination of them, but I do come back to kind of a lazy effort. And it was brought up on Reddit again that there's some players in, for example, Vin Baker, or I don't know if it was you that brought it up or if I saw it on Reddit, but the 21-year-old Vin Baker from the Bucks, from the all-time Bucks, is copied and pasted onto the Celtics in the early 2000s, my NBA era, the Kobe era. And by that time, he was a shell of his former self. He shouldn't be in his prime, and he shouldn't be listed at 21 years old either. So there's that kind of lack of attention to detail. And the most ridiculous comments I saw, fortunately downvoted when I saw them by most people, in that thread that said, you can fix it yourself. Don't be lazy or something like that. And I thought, that's ridiculous. If there's any accusations of laziness here, it should go to the people that are making the game, that are developing those rosters and working on those, putting the game out with those ratings. We should not have to spend hundreds of hours, thousands of hours fixing those ratings. And people brought that up to this person, and of course they continue to double down on this horrible take of, well, you can fix it yourself, stop being lazy, stop whining, you asked for this, you just want too much. Accurate ratings is wanting too much. This is what bothers me about critique of gaming these days, basketball gaming in particular, obviously, since that's what we cover here at the NLSC, that it's okay to criticize things that you like. It's okay to point out flaws in otherwise good features and say, hey, this is great, but this is a weakness. This is where they dropped the ball. And it as I said, it does happen more in the first 2 weeks of release that nobody wants to hear the criticism, but you do see these excuses made. And that was just so ridiculous that there are these copy and paste. I think you brought up Michael Williams on the Pistons is one of the top-rated players. The young,
he's number 3. Yeah, he's the third highest-rated player on the championship Pistons at 84 overall, and he was barely getting minutes.
Exactly.
At that point, yeah.
So things like that this is attention to detail. And when they've gone to so much attention to detail on the presentation and having the rules change throughout the years, it does drop the ball. You do fumble that a bit when you don't have that attention to detail on player ages and year appropriate ratings and also undercooking players basically with their physical attributes. Yeah, this is absolutely an important issue and valid critique. So anyone trying to shoot that down, I'm sorry, you are not you are not the expert on basketball gaming you think you are.
Right. The other point too is, 2K, there's a lot of people in the modding community who do make really good rosters and are going to know their history, and they're going to, provide the proper attention to detail that you could just reach out to, and they'd love to help.
Sure.
I mean, if you want to get, I don't want to hear that 2K doesn't have the resources. I certainly don't want to hear that 2K doesn't have the money. Let's be honest. I don't know if it's a stubborn approach. Yeah, well, I don't know if it's like a stubborn thing. Yeah. I don't know if it has to be, right?
Yeah,
like you can't want to release your game with all of these inaccuracies, and I'm going to go through a few more in a second here. But with teams playing the wrong way and players playing the wrong way, or messed up vitals, all of that stuff. Like, there's people that will put in the time to do it, and some would do it for free. So there's no excuse. The other point I wanted to make really quick before I throw it back to you is it's not just the physicals either. Ball handling.
Yes.
A lot of the players in the 80s, they give them in the 90s and 80s and prior, they give them a much lower ball handling than they should. And the way 2K has worked for years is if you give these players a very low ball handling rating, they move slow with the ball, right? They move sluggish with the ball. They don't chain together moves, right, with the ball. So, like, it's a combination, from what I can tell, of rushed copy-paste tendencies, the physicals that I just mentioned, which is a huge part of it, and the ball handling.
And here's the thing. I don't want to advocate, per se, to steal the work of the community. I mean, if they were to just find the best roster with fixed attributes and then just copy and paste that into their rosters the next year, I mean, that would kind of be uncool to do that without credit or contacting the person or slinging them some money for doing it, quite frankly. But as you say, a lot of people would love to do it for free. They would just love to see it in the game by default and not have to make those edits every year. I remember talking to Rod Redicop, former NBA Live producer, talking about how they would look at the ratings that were suggested with the unofficial roster updates back in the day, and they would take that into consideration in future games. So that is absolutely something that 2K should do. I mean, should they give credit, as we do in the modding community? It'd be nice. It'd be nice if we didn't have to do that job for them. But if they see that great roster out there, then copy those ratings. They've got the tools, I'm sure, to do it much quicker than we can with any of our tools. So, yeah, I just think that's... could it be political? Could it be motivated by bias towards eras? Sure. But at the same time, you are celebrating these eras in MyNBA and otherwise doing a great job of it. A lot of detail is fantastic in MyNBA Eras, but it does fall apart a bit. A lot, in fact, when you have these issues with attributes and tendencies, animation assignments, of course, and copy and paste and everything. The older players in the eras, the old eras, having modern hairstyles and accessories and things like that, it really takes you out when you've got a rookie in the 80s that's wearing a full arm sleeve and whatnot. They just didn't have them back then, or certainly weren't very common at least. So, yeah, things like that. It's just that attention to detail, because they have got so much great attention to detail in other areas, that this does stick out as a weak point, and it is absolutely fair to criticize it.
Right. Why not? If you're going to go all out like that, and with the presentation elements and everything, why not reach out to people in the community that want to work on these rosters and will give you all of their time and resources to
exactly.
do it. In order to shore it up and really make it shine and really make the gameplay great. For example, I want to point this out. Clyde Drexler's signature shot in NBA 2K11 looks amazing. Looks just like Clyde Drexler's shot. Now in NBA 2K23, we just have this generic shot that looks absolutely nothing like Clyde Drexler's shot. Like, we shouldn't have regressed there, right? So I wanted to bring up that Pete Toll, who works on the rosters every year and tries to reach out to players to get them into the game and everything. He doesn't work on them for 2K. He just, I think he mods and whatnot. But he brought up some other inconsistencies, and I just wanted to give, in errors, I want to give you just an idea of a few of them, just so you can kind of see that we're not the only ones that are trying to point this stuff out and get it worked on. Juwan Howard, 09-10 Blazers, plus the 12-13 Heat, given extremely high overall. he mentioned Michael Williams, which we talked about, 88, 89 Pistons. He's a rookie there, but he was given his 84 overall. Kurt Thomas, 10, 11 Bulls, given extremely high overall. Jeremy Lin on the 18, 19 Raptors is given Linsanity version overall. So that Lin that wasn't even playing for the Raptors is given the best version of Lin. That's just like a DNA copy and paste. We got Larry Robinson on the 93-94 Rockets, given Leandro Barbosa's portrait. Charles Smith on the 02-03 Blazers, the Kobe era, has the wrong face assignment. Ross Strickland, missing from the 91-92 Spurs and the Jordan era MyNBA, was the starting point guard for that team. Shandon Anderson, 05-06 Heat, worst rating overall on classic teams. Horace Grant, generic cap, so a generic creative player face for 94-95 Magic and all-time Magic. That's just inexcusable. Yeah. Patrick O'Brien, 06-07 Warriors, cap is incorrect. Tariq Abdul-Wahad, 02-03 Mavs, generic creative player face with incorrect skin tone. Michael Bradley, 02-03 Raptors, incorrect skin tone. Carl Herrera, age is incorrect on both teams. Terrell Brandon listed at 5'1" height on the 2002-2003 Wolves in the Kobe era. Hey, that would be the shortest NBA player ever.
Yeah,
Malik Rose, position and height incorrect, should be 6'7" and a power forward. And those are just some of the examples. Like there's obviously a lot more.
It's sloppy.
The other piece,
sloppy.
Yeah, it's super sloppy. It's like it's so rushed. And that's what I told you I was worried about, right? Like the teams and players not playing right and not playing to the way they really played in that era, etc. So the other point on this too is that there are a lot of players that are added. Their names are added to the game, but there's no real face for them. It's just a generic cap that looks nothing like that player. For example, Walter McCarty. He has a face in the 2K17 files. I've shown video of it, etc. But they have Walter McCarty's name in the game, but he's just some creative player face. And what I noticed is through the MyNBA Eras rosters is most teams only have about 6 to 8 real players for names. And the ones that do have the real player names, sometimes half or more of them are just generic creative player faces. So I'm sure that some of that could be that they got permissions late, right? Like maybe they were trying to get permissions towards in the middle of the cycle, and maybe they didn't have enough time. I don't know. Or resources.
You saw Kenny Gaddison.
I'm trying to rationalize it, right?
Kenny Gaddison making that push to get people into the game. Maybe they came in late, as you said. Yeah, that's definitely valid. Definitely possible.
Right, and maybe there's a patch, right?
Sure.
They've done this before. Maybe there's a patch that's going to come in and make some of those real faces. But some of these caps for these players aren't even close to what they look like in real life. And as you know, caps look like caps.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, yeah.
Right. So go through some of the teams. You'll see some teams with only like 2 or 3 real faces and the rest of them caps.
And it should also be pointed out that there are players that are on the classic teams that are not in the historical draft classes. They're missing from the draft classes, so the draft classes feel very thin. You end up with a lot of generic players in the league very quickly, overtaking the league. That's been mentioned. That was also mentioned in the thread. That was also shot down by the people who were thankfully downvoted because they were talking such nonsense about, well, you do it yourself. You can just edit draft classes. Yes, but this stuff's in the game. And certainly there are legal issues. Can I point something out? If Terrell Brandon says, hey, yeah, you guys can put me in the game, do you think that it's the right to honor Terrell Brandon and put him at 5'1"? Yeah.
And make him like a copy
paste? Absolutely ridiculous.
Do you see what I mean? Right? Like it's not our job to go in there and try to fix Terrell Brandon. Like
exactly.
NBA 2K got the rights to these players. They got the rights to these teams and whatnot. It's their job to honor that. It's 2K's responsibility to get it right. And if they can't, with the current tools they have, with the people that they have in place, if they can't do that in a timely manner and get it mostly right by release, then there's plenty of people in the community that will help them get it right before the game is released. Right. So I don't want to hear excuses about this. This isn't the community's job to spend hundreds of hours trying to fix these rosters. It's not our job to try to fix Horace Grant from being a cap and putting his real face in the roster. That should be something that's taken care of.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So, right. So, yeah, I don't want to hear the excuses. Again, I have given the game a lot of props for a lot of the things that they've done right, both on PC, so current gen and next gen. But these critiques matter. And I've talked about this before. NBA 2K16, you go back, you see that they were doing this even back then, as far as just rushing and doing spreadsheet copy and paste, not having the right minds on the job for these classic teams, etc. This isn't anything new.
Unfortunately not. And you're absolutely right. It is not the responsibility of the community to fix these rosters each and every year. And yes, likeness rights are an issue, and there are some notable missing players. Pau Gasol, Chris Webber is gone, which makes the Kings a lot less fun to play with. They might be added in roster updates. Hopefully they will be. And again, I know it comes down to likeness rights, and people say that as if it's a gotcha and if we don't know. But the point is that since they were doing all of this with all this historical content this year, you really needed to make sure that you could license those players. Keep those, if nothing else, you want to keep players that were licensed in previous years. Although I do believe Pau Gasol was missing last year as well. So you do need to go that extra mile. You need to make sure you get those players in the game because they do stick out like a sore thumb. They're conspicuous by their absence, I should say. We know the situation with Reggie Miller and Charles Barkley, but with players that were in the game as recently as of last year or a couple of years ago, you need to make sure that they at least remain in the game. They disappear. It really does affect that. It's okay to point it out and say, look, we understand the issues. We understand it comes down to licensing, but given that it was this focus on NBA eras in MyNBA, then we do need to have those players licensed. We do need to make sure that we've licensed as many players as possible. They've done some good work there, but as you say, a lot of them being creative player appearances, basically. But losing those players is a blow. I hope they do add them through roster updates. And it should also be noted that on current gen, it looks like you can't edit rosters when Steam is offline. So that is a big problem.
Yeah, Sticky Fingers pointed that out. And I do think that's a huge problem. We've talked about it. What happens when the servers go down?
Yeah, that's it.
What happens
disposable
when the game
games?
is no longer current? Right, exactly. Disposable games. It almost forces your hand at getting the new one, even if you didn't want to. Maybe you wanted to stick with that title and do more editing and whatnot. So that is a shame. I also want to point out one last thing before we close the show. Have some respect. Have some respect for the players of the past, the teams of the past. Treat them as they should be treated, as far as giving them the respect they deserve, animation wise, vitals wise, the way they play on the floor. Give them the time and commitment that they deserve. And 2K doesn't do that. It almost seems like they're just names, right? They're just names in the roster. Their name is in there and whatnot. And I just think it's not fair. I've enjoyed the game overall as far as using the current teams, like I mentioned. I'm going to have to do quite a bit of editing of those classic teams in order to make them, a fun, enjoyable experience and whatnot. But have some respect.
No, that's what it comes down to, is that it's, especially when you are doing all these modes and features that are supposed to highlight the past NBA and NBA history, you want to do it justice, or you should definitely want to do it justice. And if nothing else, they're not as fun to play with. If that's why accurate ratings are and always have been such an issue, so vital to the basketball gaming experience. Why we always used to go back and edit ratings back in the day, as whenever we've been able to mod rosters, officially, unofficially, in-game, externally, whatever, we have fixed ratings that have looked wrong, because certainly when you've got over 400 players in the NBA and then add in all the classic players, there can be oversights, but these issues with those historical players have been there for far too long. There's been too many years when they could go back and fix that up. They talked about the Hall of Fame rating scale in 2K16, turned out to be more and be promised than actual great idea, unfortunately. But this is definitely time. It's past time to fix these issues, and it's absolutely a valid criticism, because if you're going to the trouble of doing all this fantastic stuff with MyNBA Eras and having the history represented and being able to play through history, interactive almanac in the current game, then you do need to have that accuracy. And there are some other gameplay issues as well that we've touched upon here on our cons list. We'll continue to talk about pros and cons and our evolving impressions moving forward. But though we do have those criticisms, there's a lot to like about 2K23. And if nothing else, it makes me want to go try and fix those rosters because I like the underlying game that's there. So to try to fix some of those ratings, or if somebody else does that and download their rosters and make use of their work, which is always so important in our modding community, then I do think I'll be playing a lot of 2K23 this year. So my first impressions are the most positive they've been in years, and I do love that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's the most happy I've been, first impression wise, probably since 2K17. And I think that's good. I still prefer NBA 2K17 as a title. I think you probably would too when you jump back onto the sticks for that game and whatnot. I still think that overall was a stronger release gameplay wise, at least with my experiences so far with NBA 2K23. But yeah, I think it's the best release they've had in quite a long time.
So again, we are going to continue to play the game, and I'll be writing a review. We'll continue to share our impressions on social media, in the forum, and here on the podcast, of course. And we'd like to hear from our listeners, Derek, about what they think of 2K23 so far.
Yeah, I'll be putting out the prompt this week, asking the basketball gaming community what your first impressions are, how you feel about the game, how you feel about, the presentation, etc. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
With that being said, that has brought us to the end of the show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, of course, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, we do invite you to connect with us on social media. That's where you can keep in touch with us and keep up to date with our content. So, Derek, I'll throw it over to you, as always, to promote your handles.
You can reach me on Twitter, where I'm the most active at D4384 and at D43G. I am on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC forums as a team member, D43.
I am Andrew in our forum, and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. Our aforementioned YouTube channel is youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, NBA-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.